Welcome back. President Trump said today he is going to chart a new course on tariffs using some existing laws to do some tariffs. But it's unclear if Republicans in Congress will offer their support or continue to stay, if they can, out of the sort of firing range of conversation about tariffs. Here's my conversation with the editor of The Dispatch, Steve Hayes, on this topic and many others. The Supreme Court told President Trump, no, you don't have the expansive powers you thought you did on tariffs. The president will clearly be unhappy, but there are other remedies. How do you think this lands from a political perspective, Steve, and from a policy perspective?
Yeah, I mean, on the policy side, I don't think the president should be particularly surprised by this. This is something that people were saying was likely to happen, I think, even as he announced these tariffs under these emergency tariffs under EPA, as it's called. So on a policy perspective, I think the White House has been gaming out for quite some time alternative paths to doing the same thing. I think the question will be, how do Republicans in Congress handle this? There's already some suggestion that they're going to try to codify these tariffs through legislation. If they do, it would be one of the first times Congress has done its job, if I have to say, on these matters. But there's a complication there because so many Republicans, including Republicans who are publicly supportive of the president on tariffs, are privately skeptical, and some even opposed to the president. So I think this makes that a knotty process for him.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Steve, because it goes to something that I believe is somewhat consistent with some relationships that this president has with Republicans in Congress. They like him to use executive authority because then they don't have to vote on it. But if there's a reconciliation bill, which is something that gets through the House on a majority vote and just through a simple majority in the Senate, then they would have to vote on it. And then this question would be right in their political breadbasket.
That's exactly right. And, look, even somebody like Senate Majority Leader John Thune has been a longtime opponent of tariffs and protectionist policy more broadly. Now, he's been somewhat friendly to President Trump. He hasn't thrown up many roadblocks in front of President Trump's approach to trade, generally speaking, even though I think he has personal misgivings about the effects, particularly on farmers and the ag industry in South Dakota. How does John Thune handle something like this? Does he work with the president to try to come up with these alternatives, or does he say, hey, look, I'm a Reaganite on the question of trade and tariffs, and I'm not in favor of this. And by the way, neither is the majority of my Senate Republican conference.
I'm always mindful, and President Trump has taught me to be mindful about the importance of his populist appeal. I imagine those close to him will talk about this as a decision that sides with globalists and globalist economic trend lines that have devoured the aspirations of the middle class and the lower middle class in our country, and I've got to fight even harder.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that's exactly what you're going to hear increasingly and in increasing volume in the coming days. Look, and that has a certain appeal. I mean, there's no question that the Republican Party, the base of the Republican Party, is strongly where Donald Trump is on this. And as I said, you even have some Republicans in Congress who don't agree with the president, who are willing to amplify those arguments because they know that it appeals to his base. So I think you can expect that the president will do this. There may be another side boon to this. Lots of economists have suggested that if the president isn't allowed to continue to impose these tariffs, there will be economic benefits. There are some studies that have shown as many as 96% of the costs of these tariffs has gone on to American consumers, not the foreign companies and foreign countries that the president has suggested. In these refunds to those companies, are there economic benefits? Certainly some of the economists I've talked to think that there are.
All right, let's broaden this out a bit, Steve, because if you were to write a one-sentence summary of the biggest issues in the first year of Trump 2.0, you would have said tariffs and immigration. I think anyone would have come up with those two as the two biggest, most jarring, most aggressive applications of understood or implied executive powers. Where do you think President Trump and his administration stand on immigration right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some self-inflicted wounds here from the president on immigration. You're right. I mean, if you look back at just look at the exit polling after the 2024 presidential election, people were strongly in favor, including many independents, of what the president was proposing on immigration. I think people have liked what the president has done as it relates to closing the border, ending the sort of flood of illegal immigrants that we saw coming in through the Biden administration. But they don't like what I think many people regard as the over-the-top policies, deporting people, going after people who aren't the hardest of the hard criminals. And that, I think, has had some negative effects. We've seen the president's polling slide over basically beginning at the end of last year through the first 6 weeks of this year. On the question of immigration, I think it's now a toss-up, whether it's a benefit to the president or a political negative.
So the numbers economically, the White House points to suggest robust growth, super high foreign investment, domestic investment, manufacturing, but there is not a lot of job growth. And I wonder if you think that is a tailwind, or rather a headwind, forgive me, for this economy, for this administration, and for Republicans broadly in the midterms.
Yeah, I think it certainly could be. I mean, this is a mixed economic picture. I mean, people who've been doing this for a lot longer and who know a lot more about this than I do don't know how to read these various contradictory indicators. But I think if you look sort of broadly at the question of job growth in particular, you have seen a slowing over the first year, and particularly compared to the last 4 years. There's no question that that could have real effects as people are increasingly concerned, and there's increased chatter, both among economists, but also among people just having real conversations over their kitchen tables about the implications of artificial intelligence on the job picture and on the economy more broadly. So I do think it has a potential to create some additional challenges for the president to make as he makes his best case to the American public, and Republicans do, that they should retain both houses of Congress and the president's support.
Steve Hayes, a pleasure. I hope we'll do it again.
Thanks, Major.